Let's get started. So thank you for joining me for week 4, modeling a signet ring, which I'm pretty pumped for. And so this is a one or the fourth of a 5-week series of classes through April. Next week's class will be modeling a really feminine, super textural floral ring, which I'm really looking forward to designing this weekend. But yeah, so let's just jump right in. Okay, before we get started, just a couple of things. So, as I mentioned, you should at this point know your ring size, or you can follow along with me, which will be a size 6. Typical sort of guidance for ring sizes. 6, 7, and 8 are sort of the standards that you would see in stores for women's hands, but that certainly doesn't mean that that's everybody. That's sort of just the average commercial sizing that you'll see out there. So if you have not yet, so this class is a beginner class where I'll guide you through the design process of this style ring. You'll have options to customize along the way. However, I'm not going to start from the very, very basics of Tinkercad. So you should have some basic familiarity with Tinkercad already. If you do not, I do have a class on my YouTube channel that's already recorded called Introduction to Tinkercad, which gives you just a quick half hour on the basics, which I will not be covering here. This is really sort of focused on the design process. About this class, this will probably be about an hour and a half class, just knowing the previous weeks. Could go a little bit longer depending on how fast we move. And then, yeah, let's just jump in. So, the signet ring. So, I'm going to kind of walk you through what we're modeling and the order that we'll be modeling so that you can kind of know what to expect as we go along. So, this is an example of one that I had done as just a little demo. And so the way that this is going to be modeled, we are basically going to start by defining this inner ring size or the cutout of the shank. And so again, I will be using measurements of a size 6. So you could follow if you'd like. And then we will then move to starting to build this exterior shape. So building out the actual volume of the ring itself. We'll then position the sort of cutout so that you start to get this flat surface up here. And then the last bit will be moving to the side and really carving down this profile. And so a signet ring is really, this is a pretty classically shaped signet ring where there's this sort of flat, plateaued sort of surface that has an engraving, an inscription. You could add raised details. You can add, I'm just going to show you how to do sort of a simple engraving, but you can really kind of have fun with this. And then this is a sort of a classic shape signifier of a signet ring where you have this sort of wider platform that then sort of cuts down into a narrower side band. So one thing that is a bit different about this is that than other classes, if you've joined me for previous weeks, is that we will really be setting everything up. You'll have a lot of objects on the work plane before we then sort of trim everything down. So it can get a little confusing because you're like, whoa, there's so many different pieces of geometry. But I'll walk you through each of those and you'll really see how it comes together very quickly at the end. So just some general guidance about this ring. If you do choose to fabricate it on Shapeways, which there was a coupon code up on the screen where my video is now, this ring at what you saw on screen runs about $40 to $60 on Shapeways. However, it's not hollowed out. And I'll just kind of remind you at the end how you might want to hollow that ring out that will really cut away that price a lot because the pricing is very much dependent on the material used. So how much brass or how much bronze or silver that you're using in that piece. Okay, so let's jump right in. So if you do not already, please open Tinkercad and get your workplane set up, and then go ahead and label your file. So mine will be Signet Ring Demo. And again, you don't have to do that; it will save automatically. So if you do ever run into any glitches, I don't think I've said this before, but if you do run into any glitches where you feel like something is not trimming correctly or something is showing up in a weird way, you can always just click on the main logo, go back to that main menu, and then jump back into this design. And usually that clears up any kind of glitches. So just one thing to kind of keep in mind. Okay, so the way that this class will work, as with all of my classes, I will run this in a specific way so that you can really follow along. So I will show every single step one time, and you will just really just have to watch me on screen and sort of listen. You don't have to follow along the first time. So I will do a couple small steps and show you and talk through them. And then I will tell you, now you can jump in, and then I'll kind of undo my work, and then I'll do it again and talk through it a little slower. So the first time, just watch me and kind of catch what I'm doing, and then I'll cue you to jump in. I'm on about a 5 second, or you're on a 5 second delay to me. But I just want to mention, feel free to ask any questions in the comments. I have the chat box open here so I can see. So I'll kind of be looking over to the screen to be just making sure that no one is lost. Feel free to just throw up a hand and say, hey, could you do that again? Or slow down or speed up or whatever it is. Happy to take feedback there, although everyone always seems to be so shy. Okay, so let's jump right in. So as I mentioned, the first thing that we're going to do is define the inner ring size, or the ring size itself, or the sort of inner cutout of the shank. So to do that, you're going to grab, and this is where you can watch, you're going to grab a cylinder hole from this basic shapes menu, and you're going to drop it onto the work plane. The first step you'll do, and you can keep watching at this point, is you are going to rotate that cylinder by 90 degrees, and then you're going to increase the number of sides. Okay, so now it's your turn to go ahead and do that. So I will do that again. So we are going to grab a cylinder from the work plane, and it's going to be the cylinder hole, that one at the very top that's the gray, sort of gray striped, and just single click to select it and then drop it onto the work plane. And then we are going to rotate it by 90 degrees. And we are going to increase the number of sides over here in the shape menu up to 64. And just to sort of show you why we're doing that, if you're not familiar. So I'm just lowering it. So you see when I've lowered the number of sides, you see how this round shape is actually very flat and faceted. That's because this shape is actually a series of flat mesh faces, which is how it's represented in a 3D software. What we want to do is we want to increase the number of sides, or the number of faces, to be the maximum, meaning that now it's a much smoother cylinder. You can still sort of see these facets, but they're much smaller. And so that really gives you a much smoother finished product versus that more faceted shape. So I'm just going to show that one more time just to get you started. So grab a cylinder, drop it to the work plane, rotate it by 90 degrees, and then increase the number of sides to 64. Okay, that's where we're at now. All right, so everyone should have exactly this on their work plane. So we are now going to resize this. All of these basic objects have a default size. The cylinders are 20 by 20 millimeters. We're going to change that now to be your ring size. So as I mentioned, my ring size is a size 6. That equates to 16.5 millimeters. So I'm going to change my dimensions to 16.5, and you can just watch this, to 16 point, oops, sorry, that was the wrong size, to 16.5. So this is now, to just show you that again, so I changed this front measurement to 16.5 and also the height to 16.5. I'm also going to be changing my thickness. So at this point, you kind of have to decide what your ring shank thickness is at that thinner area, at that sort of side and bottom of the ring shank. This is always up for changing, and the beauty of this design is that you can change it at any given time. We don't really set things in stone until the very end. So if you feel like it's too thin, it's too thick, you can always change that. So let me just do that again, and at this point you're welcome to follow along. So I'm just going to tell you what I'm going to do first. I'm going to change my ring size, change my cylinder size to match my ring size. And then I'm also going to thin it out to be the same thickness as the finished ring itself on that bottom and side walls. So doing that on screen, and go ahead and follow along and do this as well. Changing my measurement from 20 millimeters, which is the default, to 16.5, which is a size 6. You would key in your own ring size if you're doing a different one. And then also this height to be 16.5. And then the last thing is to narrow this cylinder out to be your desired thickness. I'm going with 3. That's what I had done on the model that I showed you. I would say you could go down as skinny as about 2 millimeters. You could go as chunky as about 5 millimeters. If you go much chunkier than 5 millimeters, be aware that your ring size might have to get bigger. The wider the shank or the ring band is, the sort of more of your skin that gets in the way of it. And so you tend to, like, I'm a size 6 on my ring finger in a skinny band, but I'm like a 7.5 in a really chunky band. So just kind of keep that in mind if you do have a set ring size in your mind. Okay, so looks like everyone is still caught up. All right, so you should now just verify on screen that your cylinder hole is your ring size, so 16.5 for me, 16.5 for me, and then I wanted to go with that 3 millimeter thickness. And yours can be wider or narrower if you'd like. Okay, so the next step we're going to grab a sphere, and you can just watch this part. We're going to grab a sphere from the basic menu, and we're going to drop it like right over top the cylinder, and it's going to cover it, but don't worry, we're going to change it to be a hole so that we can still see everything happening inside. And so go ahead and do that with me. So again, that was grabbing a sphere from the basic shapes menu and dropping it just roughly on top of your cylinder hole. It starts out as a solid. We want a blue solid. It should look just like my screen. We want to just change that to be a hole as well. And it's going to be sitting pretty much right on top. Don't worry if it's not totally centered. We'll fix that. Okay, scrolling down. Okay. So this part, just bear with me for a second and just kind of watch here. So this is where it gets kind of tricky because we're not going to see things really coming together for the next few steps. So you'll just have to kind of take my guidance and trust that it's going to turn out okay. So this sphere that we just put onto the work plane and turned into a hole, this is now going to be the outside. This is really setting the wall thickness or the ring shank thickness. So this is really what's going to end up. It's going to be a solid, and this is going to be essentially the body of the ring. This sphere is going to be the whole body of the ring. So you have to decide at this point, what do you want that ring band thickness to be? For me, I like to go anywhere from about 2 millimeters to like 3.5 millimeters, because think about, this is going to be what sits, on your finger. And so if you make it really, really chunky, it's going to feel like you're spacing out your fingers at the knuckles. So this is just like, what is the thickness of your ring? And at that point, you then have to decide what my new dimension is to account for that thickness. And so let me give you an example. I want to have 2.5 millimeter band thickness. And so that means that I have to add 2.5 millimeters on one side and 2.5 millimeters on the other side. So totaling 5 millimeters. So my sphere is going to be 16.5 millimeters plus 5 millimeters. And let me just show you what that looks like. So that's 21.5, 21.5, and you're changing all 3 dimensions here. So really if I lost you just now, what I did is I thought about what was my ring size. So what is the size of that smaller cylinder that we just sized? And what do I want to add on as my wall thickness? So is it 2 millimeter ring thickness? Is it a 3 millimeter ring thickness? You just need to add that onto either side. So if it helps to make this more simple, I say, okay, 16.5 was my ring size. I then add 2.5 and 2.5, and I get 21.5. 21.5. So I'm going to just give you a second to kind of do that math. It could be a little tricky for a second, and I will undo. And so I'll just kind of hang out here for a second. So I'm going to change my sphere to be 21.5 by 21.5 by 21.5. I'm changing all three measurements so I have still a perfect sphere that has been sized up. So if for some reason you're like, I don't know if I did it right, that's okay. Bear with me, and there'll be a moment in a few steps where we can check that. So if no one is screaming out for help, also feel free to just drop in the comments, my ring size is this, and I want this wall thickness. I want a 2mm wall thickness. Like, what should I be punching in here? And I can help you right now. So I'll just give you a second. Okay, so keeping an eye on the comments, but looks like you guys may have figured it out. So moving on. So we are just going to quickly center all of these two objects together. So a tool, if you're not familiar yet, I love this tool. This is the align tool. So we are going so what align does is it lines up objects by common points, and in this case, the center point. So let me just show you on screen what that looks like. I am going to use a bounding box, and to do that, I'm single clicking and dragging my cursor, and everything that my cursor touches now is selected. And I can verify that by looking at the shapes menu up here, and it says 2 shapes are selected. What I want to do at this point is I want to select the Align tool, and that's up in this corner above the Shapes menu. Now, I get all of these nodes that pop up. So these nodes are various points of alignment that I can choose from. If I hover and don't click, you'll see different points of alignment previews itself in red, and the objects temporarily move to show me what those look like. So that kind of gives you some tips as to what you're aligning. What I want to be doing is aligning all 3 center points. So there's a center point here, there's a center point here, and there's a center point here. And that ensures that from every angle, those 2 objects are completely lined up in the center. And you'll understand why we do this as we get a little further. So go ahead and do that. I'm just going to make this more obvious so you can see what's happening. So go ahead and either bounding box select these 2, or you can select one, you can hold shift, and you can select the other object. That's a nice way to do that as well. It's a little harder when they're overlapping. You may not be able to grab one object. Oh, that worked, but it gets a little challenging as you've got multiple objects. So however you want to select both objects, do that now. Go up to the Align tool, and then you want to click all 3 center points of alignment so that they are grayed out. So your alignment nodes should look just like mine at this point. Your screen probably looks like mine. Your cylinder or your sphere might be larger, might be a little smaller. Your cylinder might be larger, might be smaller, but roughly this is what we're looking for. Okay, so to make it even more complex, we are now adding another object to the workplane. We are going to grab, and you can just watch this. Oh, well, this will be fast. You're going to grab a box hole, which it was next to the box cylinder. I'm sorry, the hole cylinder. Going to grab a box hole, and you're going to basically drop it in the same spot. Again, just overlapping with the 2 objects already on screen. Once you've done that, also go ahead and bounding box select those, and then align those, just realign all those center points. You might have to rotate a little bit. So really all we did, and I'll just do that again, and you can follow along now and do this yourself. You're going to grab a box hole, drop it roughly overlapping the 2 objects already on the workplane. You're going to bounding box select all 3 objects, and you're going to align like you just did, center points only. And I'll just give you a second to look up onto my screen and make sure that what you're seeing is what's on your screen as well. So we've got 3 objects. They're all overlapping each other perfect center point alignments shown by these gray center nodes. Okay, so now is where it's going to start to take shape. And again, throw a comment up there, even if you're just like, stop, like, I need to ask a question. Feel free to do that. I am on a delay from you, or you're on a delay from me. So trying to make sure that I don't go too fast for you guys. Okay, so this is where we start to make sense of what we're doing here. So we are going to be changing our perspective a little bit. Up here in the corner, what you've noticed is that as I'm rotating around and moving my work plane, you can see that orientation cube up in the corner is moving with me. The orientation cube is locked to my work plane. I can also use that orientation cube to navigate to perfectly positioned views. And so I want to actually do that now. I want to navigate to my front view, and you can just watch this part. So I'm going to click my front view on my navigation cube. And I also want to flatten this. So now if you look at my screen, it looks a little odd. Like there's still some perspective showing. I can see like the back of the box. It's a little bit hard to sort of see these items as if they were a sketch. So to fix that, I'm going to go down here and click on the flat view. And now this looks much more like a sketch and is much easier for me to kind of, view. Okay. So let me just show you that again and then go ahead and follow along. So we've just aligned all of our three objects. We're now going to navigate on the navigational cube or the orientation cube. We're going to navigate to the front view. And if yours looks like this, it means that you need to click this bottom switch to flat view toggle. And your screen should now look like that. Okay, so just watch. Sorry, let's grab a drink of water. So just watch this step for a second. And I'm going to kind of explain the next two steps that we're going to be doing. Because this will really help you to understand what you're trying to achieve. Because right now I realize it just looks like a bunch of objects on top of each other. So just watch all of this. We are going to be using this box hole to be the thing that slices the top surface of that signet ring. So the first thing we have to do is move it up here kind of out of the way and also widen it. So I'm just essentially grabbing these nodes and then using my arrows to kind of just quickly center it. It doesn't have to be perfect because it's so much larger. I just want to sort of show you. So again, I'm going to do all this again, so just keep watching this. So we're then going to lock this item just because we don't really need to fuss with it for a second. We are now going to, I had told you that this sphere hole, that the second item that we added, that was going to be the body of your ring. So what that means is that I have to sort of deform this into that oval ellipse shape that you can then slice the top off to get that nice flat surface. So to do that, I'm going to be grabbing this top white or hollow box, and I'm going to be stretching the proportions of this up. So it looks a little bit more like an egg right now. And so what I'm kind of keeping my eye on right now is, I'm going to scroll in, is this line right here. Because when I eventually, much further down the road, group these two objects, I will be slicing off all of this. So this is going to be my platform. You don't have to worry right now if you're like, how do I even know if that's the right amount to cut? Do I like that? Is it proportionally, to my liking? You don't have to decide all that. That's why we're not doing any of these permanent steps yet. I just want to show you that this box is going to cut away everything that is inside of it. So that I just want you to keep that in mind while you're doing these steps. So let me just undo, and then I will walk you through that again. Okay, so you're here. So the first thing that you're going to do is select, oops, somehow I locked that. You're going to select your box hole and you're going to use the black or solid arrow to raise it up, and you're going to widen it and use your arrows in your keyboard to move it roughly to the center. It doesn't really matter. We're going to center it later. Okay, so let me just do that again. And this time you can follow along if you have not. So we're going to select the box hole. you're going to use that black arrow above the box hole to raise it above your two circular objects. You're going to grab one of these bottom hollow or white boxes, stretch this box out to a rectangle, and then use the arrows to move it back roughly to the center point. Okay. You can lock this. You can keep it unlocked. It depends if if you're going to have to move it again, you may just keep it unlocked. So the next step then is going to be to grab this larger circle or this sphere and to reshape it to be more like an egg or an ellipse by selecting that top white box or hollow box and lifting that up. You don't want to grab the arrow because that will lift the whole thing off the work plane. You just want to grab that top box and drag that so that you're reshaping it. So at this point, this is sort of where you kind of play. I don't necessarily want to have like a crazy high area here. So I actually might bring my box a little bit closer down. I think I like that a little bit better. If at this point you feel like when you are moving the box or you're moving, you're resizing your sphere, if you're feeling like it's moving in too big of a motion so it's sort of jittery, it's like clicking into place, that's because your snap grid down here is set to 1 millimeter, meaning that every unit of motion is 1 millimeter. If you're like, oh, I need more subtle movements, you can change this to be like 0.25. And now it's a much smoother dragging action. See how it's more smooth? I'm now moving in 0.25 millimeter increments. So just at this point, take your time to kind of like guesstimate what this is. Proportionally just looking at it. Again, we're not locking any of this at this point. We're saving that to the very end. So you'll have time once this really starts to fully come together. You'll have time to then say, oh, you know what? I did want to make this a little bit thicker in this area, or I wanted to make this a little skinnier in this area. You'll be able to move all that stuff along the way. And this is an object that's very easy to ungroup and then sort of unjoin these parts to then edit as you go if the very final ring isn't really to your liking. It's a really easy one to edit. So, okay. So everyone should be here at this point. Please do say something if you need that shown again. Otherwise, I will be moving on. Okay. So moving on. So we are going to be going back to that orientation cube, and you can kind of just watch this at the moment, to now go to our side view. So our side view right now really doesn't look anything like a ring. So what I just want to do is just kind of explain what we're going to be doing. So we are going to be, so what we're looking at right now, this inner floating cylinder in here. Remember, that was the original ring size, the cutout of the ring itself. And this thickness right here was the thickness that you chose as your finished thickness it was the very first sort of step that we did. So this right now is really only serving one purpose. It's acting as a guide so that you can then build all these other objects around this and sort of know what your original intention was. This object, the sphere that's now more like an egg, this is going to be the actual body of our ring. And so we reshaped it from the front view. This is our surface cut. But now we need to reshape it from the side view because this is a very wide ring at the moment. And you might be feeling a little bit like, I don't know what we're looking at. Like, this doesn't feel like a ring. It's really not going to feel like a ring until like the last few steps. So it's just, don't worry if you're feeling a little bit, confused at this point. It's going to make more sense pretty soon. So let me have you go ahead and do that. So we were in the front view. So all I want you to do is use the orientation cube and then click on that right flat view so that yours really should look very similar to mine at this point. You should have the 3 objects showing and they're all holes and you're seeing this flat view. Remember, if yours looks something like this perspective, just toggle this flat view button down here on the left side. If you did not previously, please change your snap grade down here in the bottom corner to be 0.25 millimeters. We're going to need to make some smaller adjustments, and so this will help. So make sure to change it to 0.25, so it says 0.25 in the snap grid. Okay, so watch along at this point. So I need to resize my side view of my sphere, which will be the body of the ring. And when I say resize, I mean I need to make it thinner. You have the option at this point of keeping it the same. And if you want like a really robust, chunky ring that you're going to put some like big design on the top of it, you can leave this chunky. I wanted kind of a little bit more of a delicate one. And I realized that so we're going to be cutting a lot of this material away to give it that nice sort of side shaping. But what I want you to kind of look at right now is this area right here. So remember how I said that this section where it overlaps the box hole is going to get cut away. So right now, the top surface of your signet ring is as wide as these two objects overlap. So really, it's that like Venn diagram. This area right here is getting cut away, leaving from this intersection point to this intersection point. Though that's going to be the width, the side width of that surface. So if you feel like it's too wide and you would like a little daintier of a ring, at this point, you're going to want to make this sphere narrower. And you do that just by dragging one of those white boxes or hollow boxes to make it skinnier. And then you're going to use your arrow keys on your mouse, on your keyboard, to just roughly center it again. And don't worry if this is like, a little bit off center. It doesn't really matter at this point. We're going to be recentering all of these items. So, but what I'm really concerned with at this point is, okay, that's a little skinnier. I actually think I might go a little bit wider on this one. So what I'm looking at right now is this dashed line. I'm trying to just kind of eyeball it so that it's centered on over my internal cylinder. And then just kind of keeping an eye on these two intersection points right here on either side, because that's my side surface, like sort of boundary. So go ahead and do that now if you haven't. So really, I'll just undo that. So that was really just starting here, making sure that your snap grid is at 0.25 millimeters, 0.25 millimeters, and then adjusting, narrowing out. You could also make this wider. If you want this to be a massive ring, knock yourself out. But I would recommend kind of staying where you're at or going a little bit narrower. Just to know that the fit is still going to be okay for the size that you're doing. So you should have some kind of, egg shape here. You could really make this skinnier. You could really go like this if you wanted. If you wanted a really little sort of super delicate ring up there as well. So just kind of work through that. And again, all of this is like open for changes before we finalize all this stuff. So if you're still just kind of like lost and like, how is this going to turn into a ring? We're getting close. Okay. So moving on. So what I want you to do at the moment, this will really kind of help lock this in. Let's just really quickly turn this object, this sphere object, back into a solid. And then just kind of pull out of that view a little bit so you can really see. So all of that gray area on top of that where the box is overlapping, that is what's getting cut away. So if that kind of helps you to understand like, oh, okay, that's going to be like the footprint of my top surface of my signet ring. So I hope that helps a little bit. So if you need to make any adjustments and you're like, whoa, that's not what I expected, make those adjustments now. And if not, go ahead and lock this box temporarily. Let's see. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. That was unlock this box. I think I had meant to lock it earlier. At this point, this is sort of the first bit of permanence that we're going to do. We are going to select the box hole. We are going to select this solid sphere that should be blue unless you change the color. We're going to group these items together. And mine doesn't seem to want to behave. Okay, this is that thing that I was telling you about. Let's just try that again. It's some sort of weird glitch. So I've got two objects. I group. Oh, there we go. Okay, so you saw before it didn't group. It just sort of like stayed red. If that happens to you, this is where you could exit out of Tinkercad. You could go back to the main menu, go back in, and then that should have cleared itself out. I've never had it not sort of correct the glitch. So fortunately, I didn't have to do that. So you should be here. So at this point, the only thing that we've really set is this top dimension. You know, one thing you could do at this point is you could scale this in if you wanted to, but I would really say like wait and make those changes until you really see how all of these pieces come together, because you can easily ungroup them, adjust one part of it, and then regroup. It's very fast to edit this. Okay, so we are going to, just when you thought that this was staying solid, it's not. We're going to change this back to be a hole, just temporarily. And we're going to, let's just really fast, everyone grab a bounding box to those two objects. And let's just double check this alignment here. Okay, yeah. So see how I don't have any points of alignment? I want to hit this side point of alignment. And it's not a big deal if you don't do that. We will redo that. And actually, I'm sorry, I want to hit both of these points of alignment. So let me just do that again and show you that again. So that was a solid. That's where you were at just now. We're going to turn this ring body back into a hole so we can just see things more clearly. We're going to bounding box select both of them, and we're going to align them on the sides and in the center. So I'm just going to leave that on screen. So go ahead and do that so that you can verify that our points of alignment are the same. You don't want you don't want any of these to be aligned. That's because these are two different volumes. You just want the center point here and the center point here to be aligned. So go ahead and just double check that, and I'll leave this on screen for a second. Okay, so I think you're all with me still. Okay, so let's go ahead and grab another box hole and add it to the work plane. And in this time, I'm going to kind of drop it roughly in front of my two objects. So again, that is just, and go ahead and do this, that's just grabbing a box hole and dropping it roughly in the sort of front, just as I have mine shown. We are then going to navigate back to that right side view on the orientation cube. So you should, these two items should look very centered. We just align them, and your box hole is kind of sitting off to the side, waiting to be a part of this design. So let me just, again, I'm just going to get your attention on screen, and I'm going to kind of show you what we're about to do, because this will kind of be awkward to look at until you understand what this is supposed to be, the purpose of this, that this box hole serves. So I am going to be moving with my arrows, moving my box hole right up against one side, the left side of my ring shank. I'm also going to use the arrow to move it down. Now, how far down? You won't really be able to decide that yet. I would say a good sort of starting point is about halfway down. But we might end up moving that. So this is where we're trying to end. The key thing here is that the edge of the right side edge of the box hole and the left side edge of the internal cylinder, that's my ring size, these should be pretty lined up. Doesn't have to be perfect. I think if I scroll way, way in, I have a little bit of a gap there. So I might like, it's a little bit too much. It's fine. You want to be right here, and you want that box hole to be about halfway intersecting the sphere or the ring sort of body. So this is where we're landing. Okay, so let me just undo that and walk you through that again. So you're here now, so you can go ahead and follow along with me. So you're going to, if you've got that box hole, and everything's a hole feature at this point, there's no solids on screen. We're going to click the right, navigate to the right side view, make sure it's flat by hitting that toggle button to flatten it out. And then, and again, make sure your snap grid is on 0.25. Select your box hole, use the arrows to move it over so that it like bumps up right against that little inner cylinder, and use that top black or solid arrow to move it down about halfway down the body of the ring. So everyone should be there now. Okay, so what this is going to be is this box hole is going to be something that cuts away and starts to give shape to our ring. Because if you remember back on when we first started the class of that demo, there was this wider area up at the top, but then it tapered out and became very narrow down on the sides and on the bottom of the ring shank. This box hole is gonna cut away from our ring body eventually, but we've got to add some more material up here because right now it's just gonna be this blunt 90-degree angle cut, which is just like not cute. So to do that, I want to introduce you to a new, really, really helpful tool. So the work plane, and you can just watch at this point. So the work plane. So the work plane it's essentially the ground. It has gravity. When I drop objects on it, the objects fall and stick to it. The work plane can be temporarily relocated. And so let me just show you what that looks like. So what I'm going to do is up here, and we don't do this in most of these classes, but it comes in very, very handy when you need to stack something on something else. So this work plane tool up here, if I click this, and you can just watch along, I now have this like little blue box that's just glued itself to my cursor. So as I hover my cursor, and I'm not clicking, it's just stuck to it. As I'm hovering on my cursor on these objects, you can see that it's snapping to these different parts of my objects. Watch what happens when I drop it onto the top of this box hole. I now have a temporary orange work plane. And when I go and inspect where it is, it's sitting on top of the box hole. My objects have not moved. My work plane has repositioned itself to be the top of this box hole. So the reason we're going to do that is we're now going to drop an object right on top of that box hole. So let me just show you that again, and you can follow along now. So you're going to go up to the work plane tool. You're going to single click to select it. It will stick to your cursor. You don't have to keep clicking. You're then going to kind of scroll in, and you're going to hover until it's gluing itself to the top of the box hole. Single click once to set it, and it turns orange. And just do me a favor, just to verify that it's in the right spot, just make sure, just kind of like rotate and look underneath the work plane to make sure that it's sitting right on top of the box. Okay. So the reason why we did this is we want to add an object that will kind of shape the cutting object that we're creating. The shape that I want to ask you to use is this round roof. So just watch for a second here. Here are the steps that you'll be doing. You're going to grab a round roof. You're going to drop it roughly on top of that box. See how it's now sitting on the box? And you're going to rotate it by 90 degrees so that the curved face, the sort of half sphere face, is now facing the right side. Okay, so let's just do that together now. So you've repositioned your work plane to be on top of the box hole. You're going to select the round roof shape, and you're going to drop it just roughly centered with that box hole. You're going to rotate it 90 degrees so the actual arc, the half circle, is facing the right side, and now facing us. So you should all be here. So the next step that we're going to do is we're going to align just the round roof that we dropped and the box hole that we had on the work plane. So you're going to either bounding box select. Now, if you do a bounding box here, make sure that you don't accidentally grab all of these items. You don't want 4 items selected. You just want these 2 items. You can also click one, click the other. Just verify that you only have the 2 items before you align them. So now you're going to align these top points. When you click the top points, because these objects are the same size by default, all of the top, so 6 of the 9 black nodes are going to turn gray. So I'll just leave that on screen just so that you can verify that yours looks the same. So you just want to align. Just click one of the top points alignment, another top point of alignment, so that you've got 6 top gray nodes that are showing alignment. Okay. So if everyone is there, we are going to now, at this point, you can grab your work plane and you can, so just to kind of reset things so it looks a bit normal again, just grab that work plane tool and drop it somewhere on this like white area around the border, and that will just reset the work plane, and then we're done with the work plane for the moment. So we now want to navigate to the right view. Okay. So let's just talk about this for a second. I'm just actually going to quickly do something. Just don't mind me for a minute, just to make this a little more visible for you. Okay, so let's talk about this for a moment. So what I want to show you here is, and you can just follow along, I'm going to change this round roof to be a hole. So what are we looking at? So these objects, the round roof and the box hole, these are going to be cutters that cut away into our main ring body that has the flat surface. So you can kind of start to see what's taking shape here. And I realize that everything has shifted a little farther away, so I'm just going to grab it and use an arrow to move it closer. What I'm looking at right now is all of this area up here. This is going to be my side profile. And actually, just for clarity, let me just do this. You see this dark blue area right here? This is what's going to get cut away. So this is now how we're creating that nice curve that transitions that wider, sort of bulkier top to be the narrow part of the ring band. So there's a couple critical points that I need to point out to you before you do this. And this gets a little bit confusing, so I'm going to kind of scroll in. If we remember, this inner cylinder, which so that inner cylinder right there, that is our cutout. It's our ring size. What we don't want to do is drop this outer edge to be lower than the ring, because it's going to end up colliding with your finger or getting awkwardly cut. So to make that a little clearer, this intersection point right here, where this object intersects with this object, that intersection point right there, and I'm going to scroll in right so it's very obvious, this intersection point right here needs to be sitting at the same level or above your inner ring size cylinder. So right now I can tell it, just imagine if you extended this line all the way out. See how that intersection point is below my cursor? That's what we're looking, or I'm sorry, above my cursor. That's what we're looking for. What we don't want is to have this way down here, because what you're going to end up doing is this is going to end up cutting all the way out, and you're going to have this weird little section right here. So if that doesn't make sense to you at this point, just think about the fact that put your cursor on this intersection point right there, where this line curves with this line, and ask yourself, is this a higher point than this down here? The answer should be yes. Having said that, this is your opportunity to reshape this this curvature right here. And I'm just going to sort of go back and show you what I mean. So this is a certain kind of curve. If I want this to be a much shallower transition, that's fine. That just means that I have to grab both of these objects. Oops, let me turn this back to a hole. So see, when I did that, if I like this curve, you can still have that curve. You just have to move these two objects up together to, again, ensure that that transition point or that intersection point right here is not sitting below this line. Okay? So that's what we're going for right now. So these objects are going to be grouped together, but first you have to decide what kind of shape do you want this to be right here. Do you want this to be a really, really gentle slope? If that's the case, that's fine too. Again, you just have to make sure that that intersection point right there is not below. See, right now it's below. I have to move these two objects up together to ensure that it is that intersection point is at the same level or above this top line right here. Okay? So I'm just going to kind of undo and I'm going to walk through that slowly. I'm not going to really talk too much, but if you need to sort of watch along, you can. So this is a hole. I'm going to go with a shallower, I'm going to go with a shallower curve. So I have to raise all this. And then once you're happy with, really, this is the shape that we're looking for. You're following this line. Once you're happy with that, you can then select these two objects, the round roof hole and the box hole, and you can group them together to make them one cutter. And you should basically lose that little line. This should now look like one shape like mine, like a little piece of toast is what it looks like, a little piece of bread. And again, before we move on, just make sure that this intersection point right here is at the same level or above this line right there. Otherwise, you're going to understand why that's a problem later. Okay. The very last thing that we'll do just with this one object is if you feel like this gap is too big, essentially we would like, ideally, these two lines are perfectly touching. There's no gap here. If I try moving that over, I actually get really nice and close there. That's actually perfect for me. If you feel like you're overshooting or you always have a gap or an overlap, you can also change your snap grid down to 0.1, which is like the smallest amount of incremental movement that you can make. I wouldn't turn it off because your arrows don't work anymore. You have to keep it at one of these intervals, so 0.1 or 0.25. Just to kind of close that gap as much as you can. Okay. So once you've done that, sorry, I don't know why my hand doesn't want to hold the shift button these days. I'm not sure why. So once you've done that, the last thing that we're going to do, the last object that we're going to do is really just going to be to move this over to the other side or duplicate it. So we're just going to select this cutter, which was the round roof and the box hole that have been grouped to combine them. We're going to duplicate it, which is this like little layer button up here. So click it, it will blink once, and then just use the arrows to start moving it over to the other side. And you can probably guess where this is going. It's going to now sandwich the other side of that inner sphere or cylinder in there. Once you do that, you're going to group these two objects together. So again, let me just show you that again. You can follow along if you haven't done it. So select that cutter object. It should be one object now. Duplicate it, which is the little layers, sort of copies up here in the corner. and then use your arrows to move it over so it's now sort of hugging the other side of your inner ring size. So grab those two objects. So select the two of them together, or bounding box, select them, just the two cutters, and group those together. So we're using grouping objects that are not intersecting or overlapping with each other. That's a nice way just to lock them together, to basically make them act as one object and not two. And I'll show you why that's helpful in this case. Okay. So at this point, what I'm going to point out, you can just watch this point right now. So really, you should be able to now visualize what your ring looks like. Your ring is all of this area that doesn't have any overlap. So if it helps to turn that object from a hole into a solid, to visualize it, this is now all of this blue. That is my final side view. All of this area that's been grayed out is going to get cut away. So this is now the time to note, am I happy with this shape? Do I like this curve? Do I want it to be a shallower, sort of tighter curve, or do I want it to be a much longer, softer curve? I'm going to move on. So if you feel like you would like to change this, you'll need to kind of go back and do that. But it's very easy just to ungroup all this stuff to really revise that. And you would just be like, oh, ungroup this, delete one, and then reshape it, and then regroup it, reduplicate it over. So let me just see if I can undo that. Okay, so we're all right here. So to finalize this and make our cutouts and see what our ring actually looks like now, because at this point you're all just seeing all these objects, and there might be some moments where you're like, oh, I don't like that. That's totally fine. That's part of this process. So we are now just orienting kind of to the top view. The last two things I need you to do, and you can just watch along, I need you to select that sphere, that which is the body of the ring, turn it into a solid. And I need you to make sure that these cutters are wide enough to cleanly cut through the entire ring, okay? You don't want it like hanging off on one side because you won't be able to cut that away. So just extend this box out just so that it's the right size. So go ahead and do that, and I will do that again with you. So again, that was kind of scrolling out a little bit, looking at this from the perspective view, selecting the ring body, changing it to be a solid, selecting the cutters, which should be grouped as one object, and then just widening them so that they easily, very clearly cut away that object. And then before we group this, the very, very last thing that we want to do is align all of this. So you're just going to drag a big old bounding box around everything, hit the align tool, and you're only looking for one point of alignment right here. And that is this center point on the side right there on the right side. So I'll show you that so you can kind of see right there. That is the only point of alignment that you want to be clicking right now. Otherwise, you can really throw some things off. So if you accidentally clicked a different one, please undo that. So I'll just leave that on screen so that you can verify that your alignment is matching my alignment. Only that side center point of alignment. Okay, so now to set all of this, you're going and cut everything away. You're going to select, single click to select your solid sphere, and then hold shift and select your cutters, and then now group those objects. And this is essentially what your ring is mostly going to look like at this point. So at this point, if you're like, what, this looks terrible, you have to sort of, this is now, again, we built all those objects in that format, in that sort of like, we didn't trim too many things as we went, so that you could then really evaluate this and decide, do I like this? Do my proportions make sense? Do I want to change anything? If you do, that's totally fine. Just ungroup all of this, and just change the proportions that you need. For me, if I'm like, oh, I actually want this to be like kind of curving up faster, that means that I would need to lower that front view sphere shape so that there's not so much being cut off. If I feel like there's not enough of this plateau or this platform, that means that I might need to resize the sphere or reposition that box hole that cut away. So there's not that many objects that make up this shape. So you can easily ungroup these without having to undo all that. Just ungroup all of it and then just change the object that needs to be changed now that you know like how this piece was put together. So we are going to move on though. So the very last thing that I want to say is we obviously need to cut our ring band, our ring shape out of here. So to do that, you need to sort of find that guy again. And if you can't click it, like see, I like kind of can't find it. That's all right. I'm just going to move this out of the way. There it is. You're just going to now at this point, you can now resize this because you used it as a guide. But now all you're doing is cutting the hole. So just resize it so it's plenty big and then just make sure that you recenter it. And the center point you're looking for is only right there. Just that one center point. So resize that and then group all of that. So I'll just actually undo that, show you again, and go ahead and follow along. So if for some reason you can't seem to select that hole, it's sort of sunken inside the ring, just click on the ring, use the arrows to move it out of the way. Just find your hole, cylinder, make it plenty large, and then just double check that alignment so that only this point of alignment is grayed out. I'll just leave that on screen so that you can verify and get there. Okay. And the last step is to grab both of those objects and group them together to cut away your ring band. And so this is why I just want to kind of point this out. This is why I was saying you want that intersection point from the side view to make sure that it's above, because see this cutout right there? If my intersection point was lower, I would have taken this like chunk right out of that, and that's not a cute look. So yours should look like roughly like that. If you ended up having that intersection point sitting much higher, you probably have a little wall right here. That's totally fine too. If you fabricate this and you have it, you order it in a polished finish, the polishing is going to soften these edges. Not a crazy amount, but it is going to sort of take the edge off. So you won't have these like really crisp corners. You'll have this sort of little polished down section. Okay, so at this point, the last thing that we have to do is to really work with this blank slate up here. And again, if you don't love some proportion of this signet ring, or you're like, oh, now that I know what I know, I'd like to go back and try and play with it, that's fine. Maybe what you could do is just, if you plan to edit your ring, duplicate it so you've got two, and just hide one of them. And that way you've got like a blank slate to play with. And just hide it. And then you can verify up there that it's hidden. But moving on, so the last thing that we're doing is really decorating or adding our design to this top surface. And there's two ways that I want to show you how to do that. The first way, and the most sort of contained way, is using the scribble. And you can also use text, but I'm just going to show you with the scribble. So going over to the basic menu shape, and you can just follow along. You can select the scribble, and this takes you into this new interface. I can see a preview of my ring up here, but really I'm very curious as to what this tool does. So you'll notice that I have this little circle attached to my cursor. Think of this as like your pen or like your brush. And so now we're going to be drawing some kind of design. I'm doing my own initials in cursive. And in sort of the true style of the original signet ring. And then when you hit done, you now have an object. So what I need to do is just navigate to my top view. I'm just going to kind of show you this, and I'll kind of navigate to my top view, flatten that view. I obviously need to resize this. Oops. And then move this into position. And obviously you can see that that's now sitting too low, so I'm going to raise it up just so I can see it. And you're just going to kind of like position this here. Use your arrows, move it however you want. So that's one way to add the scribble, or to add some design. So one thing you'll want to do though is just kind of, so I've just moved it up so that these two items like really intersect each other. And then I need to reset this height. So a typical engraving is like 0.5 to 1 millimeter deep. I really wouldn't go too deeper than 1 millimeter. If you want to raise this off the surface instead of having it be an engraving, you can do that as well. And I would say I wouldn't really go too much taller than like 1 millimeter. So let me actually just do the raised version, just since I haven't done that yet. So at this point, I could just group these objects together, and I now have a ring. If I wanted to make this a cutout, I could turn that to be a hole, or an engraving. I could make that into a hole. I could select these objects, and I could use the align tool again to align the tops. And now I can see that I'm right on that surface, group all of it, and now it's a cutout. So you've got both options. So that's the one way with the scribble. I'm just going to delete the scribble. The other way that I want to show you is with an SVG file. So you may or may not have pulled an SVG file. It's if you want to follow along, and if not, you can just watch and decide if you want to try it out later. In the comments, I have a link that you can convert clip art to be an SVG file. So let me just show you what that looks like. So if you do have an SVG file, you're going to go to import. You're going to navigate. Let's see here. You're going to navigate to wherever you saved it, and you're going to select your SVG file. You will have a preview of what that file looks like. You will then also have to decide what size it imports as. And these units are in millimeters. So for me, I'm going to say like this is probably like 10 millimeters, maybe 15 millimeters tall. And then it will readjust to verify what that proportion, what the measurements are based on the proportion of your artwork, and it's going to import it. So you'll quickly understand what the SVG file does. All of the white area in that simple sketch is going to be nothing. All of the black area is going to be geometry. So when you're looking for an SVG file or clip art to convert, where did that go? There it is. Make sure that you have something that has black values and white values. You don't really want gray because gray is going to sort of muddy the water, and you don't really want like a lot of texture. You want a pretty solid, very simple sketch like this anchor. This is a sort of great example. You can also create your own SVG file simply by, let me show you one that I did. I did my own handwriting using a Sharpie and a white piece of paper. And then I took a photo with my phone. Weird. Why is it not doing it? This is odd. I actually wonder if maybe I can only have one SVG file. Let me just actually answer that for myself really fast. That's weird. You may only be able to have one SVG file at a time. I've never tried this, so I actually don't know. But so you can actually just see here that that's my handwriting that I did with a Sharpie and a pen. I took a photo with my phone. I emailed myself the photo, and then I converted it using that online converter. I'm actually going to go back to that anchor, though, because that file is a little bit too elaborate. So 15-ish. It will import it. So now I have this great piece of geometry that I didn't have to painstakingly build. So the same process holds. You would select that item, sort of move it in place, raise it up, resize it, center it however you'd like. Maybe you want it to be, yeah. And then decide, is this going to be a cutout or is this going to be a like raised object? Oops. And then you group things together. Okay. So that really concludes the class tonight. I will stick around for a couple more minutes in case you have questions or you would want to ask, like, how would you do something? One other thing I'll mention is that, you don't have to do a very simple shape. If you wanted to, like, this is really just a blank slate. So if you wanted to build some three-dimensional flowers, if you wanted to put studs, like little cone studs on there, go crazy. Like a signet ring can really be whatever design you want. Classically, it's sort of like initials or some sort of like little engraving. But this is your design, so you can do whatever you would like to do. So feel free to ask any questions. And then, one thing that I did mention that I would remind you of is when you export this item, and if you decide to have it fabricated in metal, and if you haven't joined me in the past, I'll just let you know that I do have um, a video that is already recorded on my YouTube channel that shows you, basically walks through Shapeways, gives you an overview of the site itself, and sort of shows you like the process to import a model file. And it starts with like the exporting from Tinkercad, so you can watch that on how to export your file, import it or upload it to Shapeways, and then get your items priced out and eventually order. A couple things I will say: Shapeways right now has an insanely long lead time. I know personally, just from working with them, that they're working heavy on COVID related printing, so PPE type components. And so I think it's really just like really taking a toll on their lead times. So right now, unfortunately, if you were to order something today, they're quoting like mid-July, which is really, really crazy. Normally, it's about a 3 to 4 week lead time to have something uploaded to until when you get it in your hands, in your mailbox. Unfortunately, it's just a really long lead time. The price point of this item is like, I think it was like $40 to $60. However, you can really bring that down if you hollow this area out. So right now, all of this is solid mass. You can hollow all of that out or a bit of that out if you want to and really save yourself a lot of money. It's kind of shocking actually, when you start to like hollow things out. That's a pretty typical like jewelry workflow. So that's just some things to kind of keep in mind. Hollowing out is also would be a way to kind of cut into some of this material here. So if you want guidance on how to do that, I'm not going to show it in this class, but certainly like feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to like jump on like a little Zoom, conference and give you a little tutorial of how to do that, or give you some guidance if you like really are serious about fabricating this. So that's it. I do have a discount code. If you haven't ordered from Shapeways before, there's a discount code for 15% off of your first order. That is it's actually in the Shapeways page. It might also be in my comments here in the description. It's not. So if you look at the Shapeways tutorial on my YouTube channel, in the description I have that coupon code. I'll actually just throw it up right here over top of my video on screen, right there. So that's it there. The QDD or GDDQZ, that's the coupon code. So yeah, so at this point that concludes the workshop, and thank you so much for joining me. Definitely mention something right now if you have any questions or would like me to stay on, and then stay tuned. So every Monday at 3 p.m. I go live with New York City Jewelry Week on their Instagram stories, where we do a little recap, and then I kind of talk through the next week's class. So you can get a little bit of a sneak preview if you would like to join me for the floral ring, which is the last week, which is next week. Otherwise, I will sign off from here, and I will say thank you so much for joining me. I hope that I would love to see your work. So certainly post on Instagram and tag me, Liz Hill Weicker, or email me. I'd love to see your work if you are wanting to share. Yep. Have a great night, you guys. Thank you so much.